Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Applicant Question and Answer webinar for the 12th call of Recordings at Risk. We're really glad that you could join us today. Our time together will be filled with your questions, but we did have just a few slides to share. We want to begin with an overview and a few reminders to our platform. A live transcript is being generated if you'd like to utilize it. To turn on this feature, click the CC Show Captions button at the bottom of your Zoom window. Attendees will be muted throughout the presentation. However, you're welcome to use chat for general introductions and conversation. If a chat box isn't already displaying on your Zoom screen, you can hover your mouse toward the bottom of the screen and open it manually. In order to send a message to everyone, remember to change the default from hosts and panelists to everyone. We ask that you use the separate question and answer box to ask questions. This can be opened the same way as the chat box. Because we have limited time together, please feel free to follow along with questions as they come in and upvote them to let us know that it would be helpful to you to have them answered live. We will do our best to answer all of the questions live, but we will also share responses to all questions alongside the recording. And speaking of recording, the session recording, transcript, and question and answer document will be made available on the Apply for an Award page of our website following the event.
CLIR's work is accomplished by a relatively small staff of about 20 geographically distributed individuals, with the greatest concentration living in the DC area. Today's webinar is led by the grants team, which administers CLIR's active regranting programs, offering support for the entire grant cycle from application to final report. The CLIR grants team includes Sharon Burney, Program Officer located in Midlothian, Virginia, Alyson Pope, Program Officer located in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, myself, Jane Larson, Senior Program Associate located in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and Lizzi Albert, Community Relations Manager located in Washington, D.C., Louisa Kwasigroch, our Managing Director located in Chicago, Illinois.
Our team would like to center today's conversation by acknowledging that, as residents of the United States, we are speaking to you from unceded land of many Indigenous peoples. I'd like to respectfully acknowledge and recognize the original and current caretakers of the land, water, and air where I live, the Piscataway and Anacostan peoples, and all of their ancestors and descendants. I'm grateful to have the opportunity to live and work on their homelands and ask you to join me in acknowledging all Indigenous communities, their elders both past and present, as well as future generations. May this acknowledgement remind us of our shared commitment to beginning the process of working to dismantle the ongoing legacies of settler colonialism. If you haven't done so already, we'd love for you to introduce yourselves in the chat and share a land acknowledgement for the area where you live, if you like.
We've had a lot of questions about eligible materials, so we wanted to take a quick moment to highlight a few of the AV formats that have come up recently. In sharing this, we want to emphasize that there is no definitive list of eligible materials. We continue to encounter unusual AV formats that fit the priorities of this program. So as you consider whether or not the materials you have on hand fit, remember that this program was designed to prioritize at-risk, time-based analog materials for preservation through digitization. This program does not support file migration for previously digitized or born digital materials. We continue to welcome your questions on this.
The Rights, Ethics, and Reuse section will help reviewers assess an applicant's understanding of the legal and ethical issues affecting the nominated content and evaluate the proposed approach. So we wanted to bring some attention to that. We require you to dedicate all metadata to the public domain under a Creative Commons waiver and to avoid imposing additional access restrictions on the reformatted recordings than what may already be in place for the source recordings. While this program does prioritize preservation over access, reviewers strongly prefer that applicants avoid creating unnecessary barriers to access, since such barriers inhibit a project's impact. Access restrictions are allowable when well justified due to legal and/or ethical concerns. Such restrictions will not necessarily disadvantage you in the competition and may even be viewed favorably by the review panel. This includes restricting access to recordings that include personally identifiable information or culturally sensitive material. Now we'll start with our first question. Oh, we have no open questions.
Yeah, make sure to use the Q&A feature on Zoom to submit your questions. Does anybody have any? Yeah, here we go. Okay. Would the repair of glass recordings be considered as something that could be funded by this grant? Alyson, do you want to get that?
Sure. The primary focus of the program is digitization. If you had glass recording, like glass lantern slides, and you wanted to digitize them and they needed to be repaired in order to be digitized, that would be an allowable expense within the program.
Next question, is the funding for CLIR at risk, I guess recordings at risk going forward? I think you're talking about this specific program. We're in conversation right now with the Mellon Foundation about future calls for the recordings at risk program. We do definitely encourage you to sign up for the CLIR programs, grants and programs newsletter for upcoming calls for proposals. And I guess this could also go on. Is this program funded with federal money? If so, is there any confidence the program will continue to assist? No, this is a regranting program from the Mellon Foundation.
Okay. Good afternoon. I would like to ensure that I can submit an application on behalf of our organization. How do I ensure that I can do this? Do I just simply need to register on your site? So you'll want to go to our apply for an award page for the program. The Recordings at Risk apply for an award page. We'll drop a link in the chat. And that will give you a direct link to both the program's guidelines, which gives you an outline of what the application is going to ask you and some insight on how to answer those questions, as well as a direct link to the application in our SM Apply system. So you would need to apply through our SM Apply system to submit the application. And if you were curious about your eligibility, the program is open to US-based cultural heritage nonprofits. You would want to contact us via email at recordingsatrisk@clir.org to ask any specific questions about your organization's eligibility.
Is it possible to apply for Recordings at Risk grant to continue the work of a hidden collections grant that I hope will be funded? This would be for additional materials not worked on in the hidden collections proposal. Yes, but often we do have applications that are part two of a previous grant for either program, but you can have a grant from each program. So one from Recordings at Risk and one from Hidden Collections, that is allowable. And the materials, and you've already addressed this, the materials cannot be for the same materials proposed in the other application. So that would be fine, yeah.
And related to this, is there any capacity to amend a grant application if new information comes to light after the proposal has been approved? And invited, it says invited to the application stage, but for this program, it's just a single application stage. So if the proposal is approved, then you would be awarded funding. We do have space within active grant projects for the submission of modifications. Those modifications typically address changes in PI, extensions to projects, or changes in deliverables, or the addition of materials. So I'm not sure what you mean if new information comes to light after the proposal, but sometimes we do see projects where they've requested an overestimated amount of digitization funds, and they have funds left over, and they will add materials to be digitized to the project in order to use up those excess funds. That's probably the most frequent modification that we see related to what I think you're asking. So ask a follow-up if that does not address what you were getting at.
What type of proof do you need that the ownership of the materials has been transferred from the production company to the nonprofit applying for the grant? Okay, this is, we'll probably need a little more information on this, but one, you have to own and hold the collections that you're nominating for, the materials that you're nominating in the collection that you're nominating for your project. This is because one of the requirements of the program is to make the metadata free and accessible on the internet once you have completed the project. When you're saying a production company, that makes me think that these materials are ones that have licensures with other, this could be music, it could be videos, I'm not sure. Sometimes people give us gifts of deed to prove that is that they have the ability, that they own the rights of these collections. We do have an intellectual property specialist who will review every application, who will give it a review from a rights and ethics and reuse standpoint. That production company makes me a little weary. If you could give us more details about the materials that you're nominating, are these musical or video ones that have definite copyrights infringements on it? It would be difficult to prove, but you'd have to make your case about why you can make these free and accessible. Do you have a gift of deed? And the likes. Anything you want to add to that, Alyson?
No, I would just say that the application does have space in the rights, ethics, and reuse section that we highlighted a few moments ago in the slides to add supplemental materials, and that's typically where we see people add like deed of gift or MOUs related to rights around these materials. So if you do not if it's not a collection that you've cleanly owned and held for some time, and you feel like you would need to communicate the nuance around that to our IP review panel, then that's the space where you would want to upload any related documents there. What percentage of the proposed budget can be used for fair compensation for community partners, collaborators that may serve as cultural knowledge experts to help with informing, captioning, and translation? So since the goal of the program is digitization, we typically want to see a minimum of 50% of the budget going to the digitization vendor. And if it's less than that, we want to see some specific justification for why that it's needed for those unique materials. So the other 49% of the budget, you have a bit of wiggle room to address metadata processing, captioning, translation, and so forth within the parameters of the overall award budget.
How much funding is available this round? How many applications do you expect? And how many applications do you typically receive? So we have approximately $750,000 to award for this last round, give or take. And that's always dependent upon the size of the request and the size of the applicant pool. Because the applications can request anywhere from $10,000 to $50,000. So if most of the applications are at the top end, then the fewer projects we can fund. How many applications do we expect? I think it's going to be interesting this year because of what's happening right now with federal funding. So we kind of anticipate to get a little more than we usually do, but we usually get anywhere from 95 to as many as 140 we've gotten before, I believe, or so. So we don't know what's going to happen this year. This has been a unique year, so we expect unique things to continue to happen.
Is it beneficial to choose a select collection of our holdings or just whatever we feel is most at risk? It depends on the nature of your holdings in your project, but you are going to want to put forth a competitive proposal in a field of competitive applicants. And usually a part of that is persuading the panel around by building a narrative around your story and your materials. So usually kind of the more cohesive of a collection you have, the easier it is to communicate to the panel why that collection is both important and broadly impactful. So it's not necessarily wrong to focus on the risk, but I think it may be easier thematically to put forth a competitive proposal if you have kind of a cohesive narrative around the collection.
For embargoed materials, do you require a metadata record to be published? We have culturally sensitive materials with mixed rights that we would not want to publish online. There is a place in your rights, ethics, and reuse that if there are culturally sensitive reasons for why you can't make that metadata publicly available, the intellectual property and the review panels will, agree with you more times than not, as long as you make that clear in your application, or also explaining maybe a takedown policy that you have in place for things that will be questioned. But as we said repeatedly, just making your justifications to the reviewers as to why this cannot be made publicly available, explain it as great detail as possible, will definitely push you through.
What type of documentation do you need if a collection is donated to a library and the person donating is still alive? A very old person, but still kicking. Really, I like that addendum on the end of that question. We don't need anything particularly different for those. Living people do frequently produce deed of gift for donation materials. So you would just need some documentation of that sort that would go to the IP members of the panel. But it wouldn't be anything more strenuous required.
I think we have something else. Let's see. Okay. This is back to the other one. Production company is just a single owner, a filmmaker. Her partner has passed, so it's just her. The materials are Betacam. She's who has been working with the nonprofit for digitizing and public program of the materials for a year. She's an elder, but is willing to hand over ownership for this collection to get them digitized. So yeah, that's a good strategy. Explain all of this in your rights, ethics, and reuse statement, upload in your optional documents, a deed of gift. The organization should be the one applying and holding the collection. That's a requirement. We don't allow collaborative projects and recordings at risk. And then also if there's some things that she does not want to make publicly available, explain that clearly and why that might be. But yeah, it's just the metadata that has to be made publicly available. And the reason that is that you'll have to fill out a file manifest at the end of your project with your final report. And that's where we'll do some checksums to make sure that those are available and online.
Would you discourage applicants from requesting funding to help pay for a buyout of staff time? That is not discouraged. But I do want to kind of make a distinction between our two programs. So, unlike hidden collections, recordings at risk requires that you use a digitization vendor. It requires that this digitization is done out of house, and we want to see about a minimum of 50% of the ask go to that. Now, these are $50,000 max grant projects. So you can ask for a buyout of staff time in the other half of that ask if you have someone on staff who is actively working on the project. But since the digitization happens out of house, you have to make a pretty strong justification for what that staff member is doing since they're not doing the digitization. And their buyout would be limited by the downward pressure of the max grant being $50,000 and us expecting a minimum of $50,000, 50% of that going to digitization. So while it is not discouraged, and we do sometimes see funded projects with components of staff pay like this, it is a lot more limited within this program than within hidden collections because you're doing the digitization externally.
Does future planned public programming make for a stronger application, or is that irrelevant here? So the recordings at risk has 4 assessment criteria. One is the impact, which is a potential scholarly and public impact of the program. So you could include that there. They wanted to have a broad appeal for scholars, and that goes outside of just locally, but what is the national and sometimes transnational importance of the materials? The urgency would be the second component assessment criteria, which is, why is this urgent to reformat this because of the formats that they're in or the condition of the nominated materials. The potential for preservation, so you want to work out an application that has a work plan that makes the deliverables for preserving this content over time, that you're able to keep it available online in the long term. And then the approach to legal and ethical concerns that might affect access, which we've talked about a lot today with the rights, ethics, and reuse. So those are the most important criteria. It doesn't hurt to include what your public programming is going to be on in it, but it's not a primary focus. Great questions.
I don't think we have any currently in the queue. I was going to give folks a few more minutes to
Looks like there's one more.
get typed. This one's kind of a long one. We're gonna, I guess.
Thank you for your help regarding amendments to a proposal. I guess this regards hidden collections more, so feel free to pass, but I'm finding more material than originally identified in the proposal stage. So I was wondering if I can actually add additional materials, which would also increase the cost and request amount. Also, I had included student employee costs for 15 hours and 15 weeks in the proposal, but I feel it would be more efficient to bring in an NYU MIAP student for a summer. Okay, so for the Recordings at Risk grant is primarily smaller projects intended to help organizations who may be constrained due to staffing and sometimes the ability to have the equipment necessary to do in-house digitization. And so that's where most of the focus of that. For your hidden collections and also Recordings at Risk, your application is going to be reviewed by an independent review panel who makes decisions based on a lot of factors, including the criteria or the rubric for that particular project. When we talk about making changes to projects, those will be small changes. It's difficult to drastically change a project once it has been funded. Because the review panel has looked at it based on cost efficiency, based on, a lot of different criteria. So we don't use a modification process either way for anybody to drastically change their project. We do expect sometimes that when you start to go through the boxes that you'll find some duplicates or things that were unsalvageable. So the deliverables changing in terms of materials, that happens frequently.
I think possibly this is a person that's been invited to the second stage of DHC. So
That should go to the DHC inbox.
if that is your question, if that is your circumstance, so RER is one application stage, DHC is two. You do get, if you got invited to the final application stage for DHC, you are allowed to change your proposal between application stages. If that's what you're asking, yes, we do see change from the initial proposals to the final proposals within hidden collections. Within Recordings at Risk, you would only do one application. We expect your funded proposal to be basically executed as promised. So I think we're kind of dealing with two different distinctions of question here.
I think he's asking this because he plans on applying for Recordings at Risk too.
Yeah. You can, if you resubmit between cycles or you apply to both programs, there is no requirement that your proposal be the same. Especially if you resubmit, we expect to see changes because you're going to have been given feedback from the review panel, and we would expect to see changes that address that feedback. So there's no requirement between cycles or between programs that you have the exact same proposal every time.
For that project. But if it's a resubmission and you claim it's a resubmission, because we saw this happen, make sure it's the same project. If it's a different project altogether, then it's not considered resubmission.
Do you all provide feedback if an application is not accepted? There's not really instances in which an application is not accepted. There's two things that can happen. If you have a large enough technical error, you could be disqualified. And if you're disqualified, you'll be told why. An example could be like, you asked for $70,000, but the program limit is $50,000. If you get DQ'd, you'll get a pretty straightforward explanation of why you were DQ'd. If you are not, which the majority of applications are not, you will go to the review panel. We have a panel meeting where I think we have 18 panelists right now. They go over all the applications. They score them, and they make funding decisions. And every applicant receives the comments from those review panelists. I believe it's 3 panelists per application. So you will get a PDF back with your notification, whether you were funded or not, that gives specific feedback from the panel about your application to strengthen it if you were going to resubmit to our program or to submit somewhere else.
How do you select panelists? Great question. We have a form online, I believe still. If you're interested in being a future reviewer for the Recordings at Risk or Digitizing Hidden Collections program, where you can fill out a form and we look at those sometimes. We make a database of people who have submitted the forms. Sometimes we speak at a lot of events, and we also do a lot of conference. We meet people at DLF, at conferences, and at speaking engagements that we think might be great review panelists. And that's how we make our selections.
And some of them are prior grantees.
Some of them are prior grantees, that's correct. So if you're interested in that, please hit the form or send us an email along with your CV, and we'll put you in the database.
I'm wondering if this would be appropriate to ask. However, given the current federal government policy change, are there any concerns in terms of language or terms used in application content? This is not. Are there concerns? No, no. We have 2 programs. Hidden Collections has a thematic focus called Amplifying Unheard Voices. So there's a way in which it has kind of a distinct DEI type of lens, perhaps. That is not a concern for our funders, and that is not something that we are currently looking at. If it becomes a hurdle for our applicants, because of limitations that they may be facing on their end, particularly publicly funded entities, then I think that would be something that we have to look at as a programmatic team. But it's not something we're currently shifting to address. Sharon, do you want to add anything there?
Yeah, we're not a federal agency. We are a nonprofit organization. And this program is a regranting program funded by the Mellon Foundation. And so we're just doing business as normal.
Are the panel reviews conducted online or in person? The panel review for Recordings at Risk is a virtual panel review. It takes place over 2 days in June online. I'm gonna take another one because that was an easy one. My project does not seem to meet the minimum $10,000. Are there other similar opportunities under CLIR? Our other similar opportunity is larger in scope. So I don't know that it would be a good fit if you are looking for a sub $10,000 grant. But if you want to go to our apply for an award page, we do have a number of related funders listed there. You may want to check out some of their offerings.
Also, you could increase the size of the nominated materials that you're submitting or proposing for digitization
If you can bundle some collections, possibly.
into one cohesive project. These are really good questions. So, any more questions before we finish up?
Apologies, I believe you mentioned this, but can you apply for this grant and hidden collections in the same year? Yes, the programs are run separately and you can apply to both.
Yes, your organization can have both a hidden collection and a recordings at risk at the same time, but you cannot have two from the same organization under the same program.
Okay, it seems like, oh, did we get one in the chat?
I think we're done. Yeah, I'm gonna put up the last slide then.
Yeah, let me put up the last slide. Maybe it'll prompt anyone if they have any final questions.
All right, so there are no more questions. We want to thank everybody for joining us today to learn more about the recordings at risk, and some of you learned a little bit about hidden collections. We will upload the slides, the transcript, and any written answer to today's questions and recording from this session posted to apply for an award page. If you have any additional questions, don't hesitate to reach out to the CLIR grants team at recordingsatrisk@clir.org. And we monitor the inbox constantly. Don't forget that applications are due April 14th, 2025. And thank you for your interest in attending our session today. We have dropped a survey link so that you can help us help you and help us make these webinars better each and every time. So thank you again and have a great day and happy grant writing.